super intelligence, these other smaller startups, and then the bigger giants, which are more business focused and more classic companies that actually care about their bottom lines, they end up getting pressured because shareholders are seeing the enormous amounts of investment by these startups, and they're seeing users start shifting from Google search to using ChatGPT as search. ChatGPT should not be used as search, but consumers think that it is. And then shareholders ask in Google's shareholder meetings, what are you doing with AI? What is your AI strategy? Why aren't you investing in this technology? And so then all of the other giants end up racing in the same direction.
What does Warren Buffett make of it? That's what I want to know. Is he sort
I
of
have
like
no idea.
you guys? If he's like, you guys are all wasting your money, he's like, he's probably right.
I have no idea. Has he invested in AI?
No, I don't think so. He just sticks to Coke and these sorts of things, doesn't he? I mean, there's two rationales. So I think one is, like you say, a quasi-religious fervor has inflected the investment decisions of some of the world's most valuable companies, which is just an extraordinary thing to even think about. I suppose the other one is that a lot of people in this space, as we'll talk about in a moment, are heavily influenced by people like Peter Thiel.
Yeah.
And Peter Thiel's orthodoxy is that competition is for idiots, right? If you're going to start a business, it has to be a monopoly.
Yeah.
And I can only presume that companies like Microsoft, etc., although maybe that's not the best example now given recent events, but XAI, OpenAI, Meta, the only reason you would invest ultimately hundreds of billions, trillions of dollars into this is because first mover advantage gives you a monopoly on the most transformational technology since the steam engine.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the only way I can make sense of it.
Right.
Has anybody in that space kind of said that? We want the monopoly on AGI. We want to be the Facebook of AGI.
Well, what OpenAI often says to investors is, if you make this seemingly fantastical bid into our technology, you could get the biggest returns you've ever seen in your life, because we will then be able to use your funding to get to AGI first. So it's still riding on this concept of the fact that there might be an AGI, which is high. It's not like rooted in scientific evidence. And even if we fail, we will successfully be able to automate a lot of human tasks to the point where we can convince a lot of executives to hire our software instead of a labor force. So that in and of itself could potentially end up generating enough returns for you more than you've ever seen before. So that's usually the pitch that they make. But, it is a huge, risky bargain that these investors are actually pitching into. And a lot of investors, they have a bandwagon mentality. Like, they aren't necessarily doing their own analysis to say, let me do this investment. They're just seeing everyone glom onto this thing. And they're like, well, I don't want to miss out. Why don't we glom on as well? But, there are some investors that have actually recently reached out to me to be like, one of the most underreported stories right now is the amount of risk that is not just being taken on by these VCs, is actually being taken on by the entire economy, because the money that these investors are investing comes from like university endowments and things like that. So if the bubble pops, it doesn't just pop for Silicon Valley. It actually will have ripple effects across the global economy.
I mean, when you look at the sort of e-commerce bubble in the late 90s, okay, it was a bubble, pets.com or whatever, it was, had these crazy valuations. But, buying and selling goods and services offline and then taking that online, I mean, that makes sense. That's a plausible sort of commercial model. But like you say, nobody's really done that with artificial intelligence. It does kind of feel like, you read these stories about Tulip Mania in 17th century Holland, and it does kind of feel very similar. You mentioned OpenAI, and we've talked about it many times. And of course, OpenAI is the central organization in this book. What's the big idea behind OpenAI? When it starts, and when does it start? Let's
End of
begin with
2015.
2015. So it's 10 years old. What are the animating values that give birth to OpenAI?
So